Good morning and welcome to another Pure Theory Crafting from Marvel Avengers Alliance 2. Today's video, kind of a counterpoint to yesterday's video over Winter Soldier. Today I'm going over Marvel Now Hawkeye. He is the very first character you get. Everybody has him. And I don't want to understate his overall usefulness. I firmly believe, no character has no strength. And Marvel Now Hawkeye has two places that I feel he is highly effective, both in the early game and up to the end game. And this video is going to be very heavily targeted at newer players who are using him because they haven't really filled out their roster and designed their own particular dream team. But I don't want him neglected at high level as well. I have some allies who have him as at 4-star as their leader, and I really like having him around. I actually bring him in at 4-star. Now, my own version is 1-star with 1-star abilities. I still use him. In fact, I use him every day. I use him on scouting missions. And I'll go into why as I go over the his abilities and then the final builds. But Hawkeye doesn't have to be 3 and 4 starred to have a daily use on my team. As far as starting characters go, he is one of the best that I've ever seen in any free-to-play game. He has the potential to reach the same 4-star abilities that other characters do. His stats will be equivalent. He won't be left behind. Perhaps more importantly, half of the characters that you will unlock will start at 1-star. He's not even starting at a true disadvantage. He is likely to be the only character, or one of the only characters, that you will raise more or less exclusively by gaining experience in battle. And he is fantastic even from an early point when you're trying to progress in content. When you're trying to clear the chapters and get the task lines done, unlock those 3 villain characters, he's really just a great all-around starting character. So let's go into him and let's look at why. Okay, 3-star is my normal benchmark. I've got him at 1-star. We can still see the stat differences. Accuracy, 1581. That's a number equivalent to what I would see on 3-star characters. At level 33-star, with characters who focus heavily on one stat, I expect to see that stat hit 2,000 even. That seems to be that benchmark cap. Nebula did it for speed. I believe Falcon does it for speed. Or at least he gets very close to it. She-Hulk does it for attack. Characters who reach 2,000 in a stat are putting a lot of their points there. And I believe Hawkeye does it for accuracy, which makes sense when you consider his character and his background in terms of the storyline. But he doesn't neglect his speed and attack. And when you're talking a blaster, these 3 stats are his core abilities. He is a fast character. Not only does he not neglect his speed, we'll see it in a couple other places. Speed is pretty common for him. Attack, very solid. His attack is solid, and we'll see right off the bat that he has remarkably damaging moves. That the attack rating on the move will make up for the fact that his attack doesn't quite hit his accuracy. And we will see how he can translate accuracy into damage with a specific debuff and with at least one of his moves having what we call deadly precision. His health, his defense, his evasion. The man's something of a glass cannon. He is a completely normal human in every other way other than his accuracy. This is pretty normal for blasters. Blasters are not really built to take a hit. People really like blasters right now, and they like them because they are high damage characters. But you're going to want a tank for Hawkeye. You really are. Anything past normal difficulty, you're going to want a tank because Hawkeye is just not built to take a hit. Now, his leader's bonus. Leadership for new players, this comes unlocked at level 10, right after you finish researching the level 9 cap for that very first time. This kicks in on the first player on your roster. Changing that first player, changing that first hero on your list from the leader slot to someone else, allows you to change what leader's bonus you're going to get, and changes what hero that your allies have options for. Hawkeye is a very good leader, but if you're looking to make some early silver off of your allies, and now that Silver Saturdays are working again, it's not the end-all be-all source of it, but you'll find that as you get higher and higher level, instead of all of your allies having their own Hawkeye, that they start to really swap. I have just like a small handful, maybe 2 or 3 allies who still use Hawkeye as their leader, 3 and 4-star Hawkeyes. I make use of them at higher level. He's not common as a leader at that point. But whether he's common or not, let's still take a look at what the leader's bonus actually does. It grants your entire team 10% to accuracy and 10% to speed. In the early game, when you do not have the ability to fill out all of your EISO slots, speed is heavily dependent on the core stat. A 10% increase beyond that will mean more turns for your entire team. And it's very good for bringing up the speed of some of those slower early characters, especially bruisers. 10% accuracy is vitally important in this game. In Marvel Avengers Alliance 2, as it currently stands, one of the hardest things about progressing high-level content is that you tend to run into more trouble landing crits and devastates. You tend to land normal hits or glances, or you miss entirely if the characters don't have high enough accuracy. Hawkeye is your way around that. Not just for that leadership bonus for the 10% accuracy, but for his passive. Master Marksman, Hawkeye never misses, ever. And let me stress that. Anything that would be considered a miss doesn't happen. Not only can the enemy not dodge his attacks, he cannot glance. To the best of my knowledge, I have tried him out, never seen it happen. A glancing blow not only does reduce damage, but it has a reduced chance of applying debuffs. The fact that Hawkeye can land solid, consistent hits even against higher, harder, more difficult enemies is something that you cannot possibly overstate often enough in terms of early game and progression content in those critical early weeks of the game when you're trying to decide if you like it or not, when you're trying to build up to a high level and join the people who are playing it in-game. That is what Hawkeye is for, and it's why I think he is a beautiful starting character. Iron Man had a similar effect in Marvel Avengers Alliance 1, where when his passive kicked in, he couldn't miss for 2 turns, but I don't recall him having that ability when Avengers Alliance 1 was released, rather when he was retooled later on. Although he could have had it early on, and I just didn't notice. At the time, I wasn't doing quite as much in the theory crafting realm as I do now. Hawkeye's ability to not miss is meant to be paired, not just for actually taking down higher level enemies, it's meant to be paired with his trick arrows. Hawkeye does not use a resource. He's one of very few characters who don't truly use resources. And all of them who do have some kind of side mechanic. Early characters who not only are not increased in star level themselves, but whose abilities are not increased in star level, tend to be very wasteful with their primary resource. High power costs, using excessive amounts of ammunition, or not regenerating enough ammunition. They use large amounts of spirit while not building very much spirit. Same for rage. Use large amounts of rage, don't generate very much rage. And this forces you to rely on your tactical on those characters. You reload more often. You recharge more often. Every now and then, you just need that extra bit of rage that comes from a quick use of the tactical. Your abilities tend to be slower on average. So, in the early game, when you haven't really started to boost up those abilities, characters without resource costs are few and far between, but are very, very helpful. Hawkeye is not limited in his abilities by anything other than if the ability has a cooldown. And most of them, that even if they do have a cooldown, it's very short. Usually just one turn, which means you can use it every other round. What Trick Arrows does is cause, and you'll see down in the corner of his screen, like right down here, what his Trick Arrow of the turn is. You'll see one of these four words matched with a color: gas, acid, sonic, and bolus. These are tied to a specific debuff: weakened, exposed, dazed, or stumbling, that reduces their appropriate stat: attack, defense, accuracy, and evasion. They do not reduce speed. He's not a character designed to really apply hindered per se, although we do see that he has a stun as we go into abilities next. These stat debuffs, people really want to look at things like static shock. They want wounded. They want bleeding, because all of these things do damage. Stat debuffs reduce the stats of an opponent by 20%. And 20% of their stats roughly equates to about a star level's worth. It's a star and a half worth, actually, because a star level is a 15% increase or decrease, up or down. As you go through the chapters, every now and then, you're going to get a chapter task that involves you fighting certain bosses, or, well, specifically certain mini-bosses, that require you to go down the secondary or tertiary paths that unlock on hard and heroic difficulties. And the star level of the enemies goes up on these paths. So that even if the enemy is, level 23, when you switch from the main path over to that path and they go from 2-star to 3-star, it's not just level 23, it's a further 15% increase in all of their stats. Hawkeye's ability to use Trick Arrows to apply debuffs brings those stat values not just back down to the 2-star where you can fight them at, it takes it slightly below that, making it easier for your party as a whole to fight them on an even level. Hawkeye is a fantastic equalizer as you're going through those harder and harder difficulty paths, eventually working your way up to the 4-star paths required to go through and fight an epic boss. A star level is 15% stat increase. An actual level is a 5%. So every star level is roughly 3 levels worth. Going from an enemy, if you're going on one of the epic boss paths, where the enemies are all the same level as what the ones on the 2-star path are, but have gone from 2-star to 4-star stats, that's a 6-level increase. And Hawkeye is how you drag them back down to a range that the rest of your team can effectively kill them. Not to say that Hawkeye doesn't do great damage himself, but he sets it up so that he's not the only one who can do good damage to them. He can't miss them, and because he can't glance, all of these are a 100% application on any turn that you use an ability with the Trick Arrow attribute. We're going to look at abilities now, and we'll see those, because right off the bat, we're going to take a look, if it'll open the window for me. Windows 10 does this sometimes. Alright, Sure Shot. We'll see that I've not really started up his abilities. That's okay. I have other characters who are filling a similar slot, specifically the ranged projectile slot. But I still make use of him daily for scouting missions. Even with just 1-star abilities, he still works just fine. Okay, Sure Shot is a normal speed ranged projectile attack. For new players, character speed determines how fast they move across the bar back to the front of the line. High-speed characters like Falcon, I've actually watched bypass and leapfrog other heroes and or other enemies. The speed of the attack determines from the starting point how far to the right it places their turn icon before it starts to use their character speed to move them back to the left. So a normal speed attack puts them, it's like about 2/3 of the way down the bar or so. This move doesn't necessarily get any faster, but Hawkeye himself is a fairly fast character, and we'll see that especially at level 20. Ranged and projectile tags for new players who've not actually made use of these before, who really haven't read into them. Ranged indicates that your buff of choice is sharpshooting. All offensive abilities are going to be ranged or melee. If they do damage, it's going to be ranged or melee. And range tells you that sharpshooting is your buff of choice for the damage increase. Projectile tells you how that damage is dealt, and is most important because there is a debuff associated with it. For projectile, that debuff is targeted. The attack tag is more important than you might think. The attack tag is what declares this an offensive damaging ability. If it doesn't have the attack tag, it won't have a damage rating. In other words, it won't cause any damage. Abilities with an attack tag will set off counters. They break stealth. They benefit from anything that increases your damage. All the things that you think of when you think attack are applied with the attack tag. If it's lacking this, it is a buff or a debuff move, and those don't follow the same rules. If it does not have the attack tag, it doesn't break stealth. It doesn't trigger counter attacks. It doesn't buff abilities like blocking that are removed the next time you attack. If it's not an attack, it doesn't remove blocking. So that little tag right there is far more important than people usually think of. It's something that's often overlooked. But in terms of the theory crafting side, where we try to understand why an ability does what it does, that is absolutely central to comparing the use of two different abilities, whether it has this or whether it does not. I personally, in these videos, look at the 4-star damage, and then I look at the speed, and I compare it to kind of a very, very, very simple rubric. If it's a fast move, I want to see 120 damage or higher. If it's a normal move, I want to see 160 damage or higher. If it's slow, I want to see it reach 200 damage, and if it doesn't, and not all of them do, I want to see it have some abilities that makes up for that damage loss. This move is exceptionally powerful for a normal speed move. There are slow attacks that do not get to the 200 damage that this does. 225 is on the very first ability that you get in the game is almost unreal. It is extremely powerful for a normal speed basic attack. It is a 100% chance by default to apply one of those 4 core stat debuffs because it has the Trick Arrows tag, and it will place off Hawkeye's Arrow of the Turn. Damage upgrade. Here, it gains precise, 25% accuracy. For low-level characters, the fact that Hawkeye always hits and the Trick Arrows, this is going to be enough. At higher levels, when you start playing around with debuffs, this, and we'll see this in just, I think 2 abilities down the line or so, we'll get to an ability that applies targeted, and I'll explain why precise works so well with targeted once it's on the enemy. But the 25% accuracy on a character who never scores anything less than a clean hit really means that he's more likely to score crits and devastates. And critting and devastating are very important for the targeted debuff. So this is a beautiful move overall. Very, very strong single target damage on a blaster who already does not neglect his attack, but also stacks his accuracy to kind of obscene levels. Okay, evidently we're getting to targeted right away. I forgot about that. Okay, Tracer Arrow. Ranged, projectile, normal speed, similar damage rating that we're looking at there, but instead of having Trick Arrows, it applies targeted. Now it starts at a 70% chance, and all abilities that start at 50 or 70 will gain a plus 30% somewhere in their star levels. Usually, they often get it by 2 stars, sometimes by 3 like this. That 225 damage rating, this is equivalent to his first shot, to Sure Shot, in damage. It has a different purpose. Seeking allows him to target a stealthy character with it by default, and that's kind of fun. More useful in PvP than PvE, but it's definitely there. What targeted does is it causes all attacks with the projectile tag, that gray tag. All tags are color-coded, which is really, really nice. All abilities with that gray projectile tag gain 25% accuracy, and then do an additional 25% damage when they land a crit or a devastate. Sure Shot has precise and therefore gains 25% accuracy base. That is a 50% total accuracy increase. Percentage increases stack additively. 25 plus 25 totals a 50% increase over his base accuracy, which is already very high. He lands lots of crits and devastates. Targeted makes him land more crits and devastates, and then it increases the damage of every one of those. This is an important debuff for anybody who is a projectile user. I've already stressed it in the Winter Soldier video. For new players who are being pointed to this video, targeted is your debuff of choice for projectile characters like Hawkeye. Application chance. They typically start at 50, 70, or 100%. Some will start at 80. Usually 80 is something you get up to. The reason those numbers are important, if it starts at 50 or 70, it's going to gain a plus 30% somewhere down the line. Its final total, once leveled up, is going to be 80 or 100. And the purpose of this is to determine whether or not you need the experimental EISO set for that following 20%. That's what the experimental EISO set does. It increases your chance to apply buffs and debuffs by 20%. If it's already at 100%, it's already at 100%. And the experimental EISO set is wasted. This move, like his moves with trick arrows, will be a 100% chance to apply its debuff. It won't necessarily need experimental to put this on the enemy. This is very good when you may not have access to that set floating around as you're building him up. 3-star is doable even for early characters. I wouldn't go higher than 1 to 2-star because you're really going to be focused on leveling up him. But once it gets to 3-star, this is a great way to stick targeted on enemy just so you can fill them full of arrows shortly thereafter. Spotter. Spotter is a buff. Here we notice its target for all heroes, and the buff, it doesn't have the attack tag. It does no damage. This move will not break stealth if stealth is on Hawkeye, either through the Veiled set or through a tactical like Agent 13, some way or other. If Hawkeye is in stealth, this won't break him out of it. It also won't set off any kind of counterattack or anything along those lines. It's fast. He's going to get his turns again very quickly. It grants all heroes at level 1 a 25% accuracy increase. This stacks additively with everything else that we've just looked at. This plus precise plus targeted is a 75% accuracy increase, and therefore translates into more damage against targeted enemies. It's also a mental buff. We'll see some characters, I don't believe Hawkeye is one of them. Some characters will have abilities with the Clever Maneuver attribute that gains damage from mental buffs. But do take note of, there's a comma there. It's a buff, but it's mental, and it's mental that you have to look for on those tags. Most buffs fall under mental, physical, or tactical. Every now and then you find a buff or a debuff that just says buff or debuff, and it does not count as one of the three. Very long determines its overall duration. This move does not need to be refreshed very often. If you're killing enemy waves quickly, and sometimes putting it up once will carry you through the entire fight, even in 4 or 5 wave fights. 2-star grants sharpshooting. Here we see that starting chance of 50%. At 3-star, there's that plus 30. This totals 80%, which means that even though it will apply focused 100% of the time, there's no percentage chance listed to it, so therefore it is 100. It is guaranteed. It will not always apply sharpshooting. If you have the experimental EISO set, it will always apply sharpshooting, because it will carry that 80% up to 100. All attacks with that kind of blue-green ranged tag increase damage by 40%. If Hawkeye is hit, he loses this. But damage refers to health damage. If Hawkeye is covered by a shield effect and and it gets hit, as long as the shield holds, he doesn't lose sharpshooting. But this is designed to make him in use with a tank. If you're going to run sharpshooting very heavily, watch your enemy lineup. If they are prone to using area of effect attacks, take out that enemy first so that you don't lose sharpshooting. Let the single target characters attack your tank, and focus on burning down the enemies with area of effect attacks so that you don't lose your sharpshooting buff. This goes up to very fast at 4-star. That is as fast as the vast majority of moves will ever get. There are a handful of exceptionally fast moves in the game. They are few and far between and are usually found on just a handful of characters. Sharpshooting, I believe, it doesn't say it, but this does say it's a target all hero. This is all hero. I can't tell from here. I think sharpshooting only applies to Hawkeye. It might apply to the team, but I really think this one applies only to Hawkeye. But that's okay because he's the one who needs it. He is your damage dealer, and therefore he's the one who needs the damage boost the most. This move is a move that puts him on my team every day. This is a area attack, hits the entire enemy line, 2 or 3 or just 1. It always does the same damage to every individual down the line. Range projectile, benefits from sharpshooting, benefits from targeted, is an attack, has a damage rating. Speed is slow. I normally say closer to 200 for slow attacks. This is an area attack, so I allow a lower damage because it's going to act like a 150 damage attack against the entire enemy line. Trick arrows, it does apply his debuff of choice to every enemy. But perhaps most importantly is the lack right here. The reason that there's 2 completely black rows right here, it lacks both a resource cost and a cooldown. This is one of the few reliable area of effect attacks in the game that can be used not only every turn, but without ever recharging, reloading. There is nothing that stops you from firing off multi-arrow every turn. And this is the move that causes me to say, even at in-game, he has a very viable spot on your daily rotation when you are farming low-level content. If you have to kill so and so many Ultrons for the daily task, or if you're trying to do your daily scouting mission, if you're using up your scouting mission energy. Multi-arrow clears low-level waves without ever needing a consistent downtime to recharge. Other characters can do this as well. Any character with a strong area of attack can do this. Very, very few of those characters can do it through 5 consistent waves in scouting without stopping to reload or recharge or have to deal with a cooldown. Hawkeye can be center line. Level 30 1-star, this clears many waves in just a single shot. And if I happen to put, say, sharpshooting on him with Age of Ultron Black Widow, who's part of my normal team, she's one of my only 4-star characters, with sharpshooting, it's going to clear waves. Level 27 bosses might survive a single shot. They might do it, but they're about the only enemy that does. So this is a quality of life ability once you hit level 30 that you'll constantly look back, that you can, I won't say that you always will, not everybody does, but it's a way to constantly look back. And as you do those daily cycle of things, this allows me to clear a scouting mission in 5 turns, as opposed to 6 or 7 or 8 or anything that increases it by a progressively longer number that makes it take longer. If I'm ever strapped for time, and I often find myself strapped for time because I spend hours of my day doing this instead of actually playing the game like I probably should, multi-arrow is a great high-level quality of life move. Useful, very useful when you're leveling up. It's a reliable area of effect at all points of the game, and it's a move that I love for just that purpose. Use it all the time. Alright, and it's doing that thing again. Alright. Windows. Are you going to open? There we go. Okay. Stun arrow. Ranged Shock. This is the first time we've seen the shock tag on him. For new players, shock tag is tied to the static shock debuff. This can be applied by a small variety of characters. It causes every enemy who is afflicted by it to take a proportional amount of damage. It scales with their health. So its damage isn't fixed per se. It's only fixed by that enemy's maximum health. And I don't know what the final percentage is. Somewhere between 2 and 5%. Every time a shock attack is used against any enemy, all enemies with static shock, not just the target, will take that damage. It's also a ranged attack. It does have its ability. It does have its damage there. It is slow speed, but doesn't hit 200. It does move down to normal, but 114 is way low for a normal attack. This is the debuff that causes you to bring it. Stun takes the enemy and pushes their turn back. Now, they then begin to get a buff called stun resistance that builds up and further reduces the chance of stun actually affecting them and pushing them back. This has a cooldown. Here's where we see that cooldown part filled in. This can be used every other turn. At 3-star, because it starts at 2, at 3-star, it bypasses Protect by default, allowing you to stun important targets like bosses or mini-bosses, even if a minion has thrown up protection and would normally be forcing you to attack them. This is used as a utility skill to push especially supervillains who take their turns very quickly. This is used to push their turns back in the order and buy your team more turns before you have to take the attacks again. Very much a utility skill. Speaking of utility skills, let's look at fire support. Buff, no damage. Speed is slow, target is self only, not all allies. 2-turn cooldown, you can only use this every 3rd turn by default. This will eventually go down at 4-star. Its speed also increases to normal, so it becomes normal and can be used every other turn. It grants Overwatch, and this gives you a free attack after any ally is attacked. Hawkeye's free attack mimics Sure Shot, but it is not Sure Shot. I believe it's called Quick Knock. For new players, a free attack, even though it shares the animation with one of your core starting abilities, it is not your core starting ability. It does what Overwatch does is it grants you a bonus amount of damage that's typically not as strong as a full attack, but is used after any ally's attack. I originally thought this was didn't include himself. Doesn't include the person who's actually covered by Overwatch, but instead covers their allies. Turns out I was wrong. That was corrected. It does actually work even if Hawkeye himself is the target. Doesn't last very long. It is 175 instead of that 350. However, especially as you get it, especially if you invest in it in late game, you can keep up Overwatch a lot. This is one of his 2 big free attack based abilities. Quick Knock has the trick arrows it is a ranged projectile, so it does bonus damage and gets bonus accuracy against targeted enemies, and it does gain bonus damage from sharpshooting, but it also has the trick arrow attribute. So his Quick Knock from Overwatch will apply one of those 4 debuffs based on whatever his arrow of the turn is. And it can be used to spread debuffs along the enemy line, even if it's not doing quite as much in terms of damage. You're debuffing the entire enemy line at a much faster rate of speed. His second quick attack, or his second free attack based ability is Rapid Shot. This one is something of a complex move, and it throws people off a little bit when you first start it. It is a normal speed move that does move to fast. Its damage caps at 96. I normally say a fast move needs to have 120 damage rating. This is how we get around it. It has rapid attack. There is a chance to gain 1 or 2 free attack quick knocks after this action. This is not guaranteed. It is entirely possible to get 0 attacks. I think there's about a 50-50 chance or so of rapid attack kicking in, and then a 50-50 chance then of it being 1 or 2 arrows on that point. What this really means is that on average, you're going to get about 1 free attack after every time you use this, and that will bring up the overall damage of this move. It does start out with a 1-turn cooldown. That cooldown goes down to 0 as soon as this hits 3-star, allowing you to use it as your normal attack. It applies trick arrows. It can apply, I believe, that the trick arrows don't change in between each one, meaning that it's going to apply the debuff of the turn, but I don't believe that it applies 3 separate debuffs. Um, it's a good way to stick it on the enemy if they have the debuff resist EISO in PvP, or if you're fighting someone who has a tendency to cleanse debuffs off themselves. This move is fantastic against Baron Strucker and his Death Spores, which cleanse debuffs. This one move can potentially take off 3 stacks of Death Spores in a single turn. Range, projectile, watch for those tags, they are very important. This often, on heroes that I've borrowed from other people, this often becomes a the core damage move. This is your primary damage move when you have it equipped, especially at that 0 turn cooldown where you can use it every turn. This really only bypasses the raw damage of Sure Shot, because Sure Shot also has Precise and thus works really well with targeted. This really only bypasses it when you have a team that can take advantage of free attacks, and there are teams that do that. Again, advice for new players more than anything else. Snipe. 3-star ability. You don't see this very often on him because most people won't invest this. This range, projectile, speed, slow, massively high damage, comes with what we call delayed. This ability does ridiculous amounts of damage. It is meant to be a finishing blow, taking off huge chunks of powerful enemies' health. Plus 50% to the base damage. That's not actually calculated in the damage rating, to my knowledge. Like, this is on top of the damage rating you're looking at. But it's delayed by the duration of the delayed status. And what happens is you see a second turn icon appear that has the picture of this, that arrow coming in and hitting the Hydra agent. And it has a small hourglass on it. And that move will move forward. Hawkeye will typically have a turn after that. Like, his turn will fall somewhere right behind it. And as the delayed status moves to the front, when it goes, that's when Snipe fires. Delayed can be interrupted in one of 2 ways. Hitting that character with a stun interrupts any delayed move. As long as the actual status is delayed, it will be cancelled. So a tank can prevent him from being stunned, and therefore can prevent him from losing Snipe. If the enemy that you are targeting with the delayed status is killed before this goes off, the attack cancels. And you just have to wait for the next move to come up. That said, against enemies, especially bosses, this is meant to be a boss killer. And it's a great boss killer even if you just get it at 3-star and never take it to 4-star. Deadly Precision increases the damage based on the difference in accuracy between the attacker and the target. This is a ranged move. This is a projectile move. When you are buffed with focused and sharpshooting and the enemy is debuffed with targeted, Snipe will gain a massive increase in damage because of the 25% increased accuracy from focused, and the 25% increased accuracy from targeted, and the 40% increased damage from ranged. All of these stack together to make this one of the hardest hitting early available abilities in the game. 1500 AP is a lot when you're first starting out. There is no denying that. This is the equivalent of 30 red canisters. But this is a boss-killing move when you are leveling up your team and working your way through hard and heroic, and you may not have a big variety in your team selection. This is a move designed to do large amounts of damage to a single powerful target. His tactical abilities for new players are usually either very fast or slow depending on what character has them. Always tend to target the self more so than they target the team. A few characters do have tacticals that target the team. This grants Confident. Confident is like sharpshooting's big brother. There's no really other way to put it. It has that same 40% damage increase. Like all percentage things, this stacks additively onto sharpshooting. But it also increases accuracy by 40%, which sharpshooting does not do. In exchange, it only affects the next attack. Confident can be applied right prior to snipe to increase the damage and increase the accuracy, and therefore, because of deadly precision, increase the damage again. Being very fast, Hawkeye can use this and then gain that second turn very quickly. Uh, these moves are called tacticals, and I feel very strongly that name is not an accident. Think about when you're going to use it and the turns you're going to make afterwards when you look at using a character's tactical. Hawkeye has no resources. A tactical is often used to restore resources once you've run out of them. Characters that use ammunition or energy get those back via their tactical. Hawkeye doesn't have to do that. The only time you ever have to resort to his tactical is when you want to. Or if you didn't take anything seeking and all the enemies are stealth. That's it. Those are the only times you'll ever use his tactical. If you are on wave 2 or 3 of a fight and you know that wave 4 has a boss, and you have a powerful attack already equipped, snipe, sure shot, something that really benefits from the damage, will benefit from the damage and accuracy when used against a powerful target. On the last turn before it, don't have Hawkeye kill that last enemy. Have him use careful aim to get confident. Let somebody else on your team kill that last enemy. And when the next wave starts, Hawkeye can begin with a very powerful attack against a powerful opponent. Confident is a wonderful buff. It is a fantastic buff that stacks damage and accuracy, and on a character that uses projectiles, anything that increases accuracy will further increase damage, and with deadly precision, this just compounds even more. Hawkeye is all about using his accuracy to increase his damage. Now, we've said that he doesn't really normally boost his speed. Most of his attacks are normal and slow speed attacks. He only gets 1 or 2 fast or very fast abilities. Hawkeye's initiative unlocks at level 20. At level 10, you get the leader's bonus. At level 20, you get your innate. And his innate grants him the adroit buff at the start of every wave. Not just the start of combat. The start of every individual wave, Hawkeye increases his speed by 25%. Hawkeye is a fast character. And this is where that shows up. For early players, you won't see this right off the bat. At level 20, that's where this kicks in, and it's an automatic increase from then on out. If you're debating whether or not Hawkeye is one of those, he's usually one of, if not your first character to break into level 10. But by level 20, by the time you're at level 19 and trying to get the resources to break into level 20, you typically have a slightly wider roster. Maybe this will help you decide if you want Hawkeye on your team all the way to level 30. It's not a bad decision to make. Let's take a look at the E-ISOs. Again, this video is going to be often used by early and mid-level players as opposed to late level, which means that these E-ISO sets need to not just be looked at by what colors they are, but what order you get them in. Yes, he has 4 yellow accuracy E-ISOs, which means that he lands crits and devastates all the time, but look at where they're placed. These 2 are unlocked by default right off the bat, granting Hawkeye the ability to land accurate crits and devastates even at the earliest parts of the game. But you're not going to see the other 2 until he hits level 30 and pushes into endgame, where he's doing heroics and where you really need all 4 of those to land crits and devastates against high level, level 36 3 and 4 star enemies who are probably closer to the equivalent of level 40. You really need these accuracy slots then, but not necessarily before then. Instead, he's got a little bit of a trade-off here. His attack stays pretty solid. He's all about using his accuracy to increase his damage. So he does get 1 red damage E-ISO. He gets that at level 10. So that helps you in the early damage when you're still working on getting all of the buffs and debuffs unlocked and stacked up. White is a speed increasing E-ISO. These 2 you'll get before you get Hawkeye's initiative, so he won't have a Adroit yet, but this will help him keep up in speed to other people on the team. His speed stat is not one of his low ones, nor is his attack. These 3 are represent his highest stats. So these just push them even farther in those early levels up through level 19. From 19 to 29, you'll also get access to these. Yes, that's another speed EISO slot. This also occurs at a time where Hawkeye gets the ability to apply Adroit at the start of every wave. The higher you can increase his base speed from EISOs, the more effect the 25% from Adroit is going to have. Most characters are not purely offense or purely defense. Some dedicated tank characters are purely defense. And a very, very tiny handful of offensive characters, often blasters, are pure offense. This one evasion slot represents a small increase in survivability for Hawkeye. Evasion is not about stacking it until you can dodge every hit, unless you're Wasp. Evasion is about reducing a devastate to a crit, or a crit to a normal hit, or more importantly, reducing a hit to a glance to reduce the chance that a debuff is applied to this character. So any form of evasion represents a survivability increase as soon as an attack that hits Hawkeye is reduced by 1 damage category. Especially because Hawkeye himself tends to have pretty poor defensive stats. Those are his lowest. Now, set bonuses. Hawkeye is there in order to deal damage. Offensive set bonuses tend to be wonderful things for him. Hawkeye is a great user of the coordinated set because it matches the damage type of all of his other abilities. Quick Knock is ranged projectile, so it's going to benefit from targeted, it's going to benefit from sharpshooting. It's not like other characters where, say, I've done a video for Moon Knight. Moon Knight is primarily melee unarmed. The free attack he does from coordinated is ranged sharp, and therefore it doesn't work the same way. It doesn't use the same buffs that he's already stacked on himself to make his main moves stronger. For Hawkeye, his free attack will, and that free attack can become very strong. So Hawkeye is a good user of the coordinated EISO set. Quick Knock also applies that lovely, lovely debuff, set of debuffs from his trick arrows. Feel free to make use of coordinated on him. He does use it very well. He's a pretty good user of the ability to bypass, protect, and stealth. He is one of your core damage dealers, and he doesn't have a passive or something like Winter Soldier's Hunted that lets him get around that. So giving him the ability to pick and choose his target regardless of their defense, either hidden via stealthy or protected by a tank, allowing him to choose his target means that you can use a high damage character against the enemies that need to die first. So offensive sets tend to be very good for Hawkeye. Some of his some of his buffs and debuffs we've already seen, especially that wonderful sharpshooting buff, are at 80%. Experimental will bring that up to 100, but not all of his buffs and debuffs need that 80%. Only 1 or 2 of them do. So experimental is up to you, and it's really based on what abilities you put on him. If you put on his sharpshooting and you have no other way to apply it, if you don't have somebody else on the team who can apply it to the team, and there are a couple of characters who can, then experimental is good for guaranteeing that Hawkeye can get sharpshooting up when he needs it. If it gets knocked off in the middle of the fight, he can always just reapply it. If you are running him in pure player versus environment and he is protected by a tank, then having coordinated and experimental allows you to take a very strong use of sharpshooting and free attacks whenever the tank is attacked. Those two can be used in tandem on Hawkeye perfectly fine. There are defensive sets. The defensive sets really begin to show different effects based on the stats of the individual. Hawkeye is a very poor candidate for impenetrable outside of PvP. Because of his low health, the gate for impenetrable is not very high. In PvP, of course, everybody right now is trying to front load their damage into a single powerful shot, so impenetrable is always good. But in PvE, when you have a tank and you're just taking damage incrementally from area of effect abilities, or if you don't have a tank and you're taking the damage straight from the front, his health doesn't get high enough for impenetrable to that 50% above 90%. He just doesn't have a lot of health and defense. Enemies break it very quickly. On the other hand, barricading that shield at 50% health, he can be knocked to 50% pretty easily. So that shield is a wonderful increase in survivability. Rejuvenating is also very good for him. If you have a tank, then the damage that Hawkeye tends to take is incremental. It is from area of effect attacks more than it is from like solid single shot abilities. And rejuvenation will have the time to build his health back up to full every time that happens. So the rejuvenating and the barricading sets better than impenetrable for Hawkeye. Outside of PvP, because in PvP you really just want all of them. Veiled. Veiled isn't bad for Hawkeye. He does not make use of it with a stealthy maneuver, but Veiled is always a 20% attack increase on that opening shot. I run him with Veiled because I'm using him for scouting missions, and his opening shot of every wave is that multi-arrow. So a 20% damage increase on the area of effect that is designed to kill the entire enemy wave in the first shot allows him to do it. And at the start of the next wave, he gets his Veiled back. He goes back into stealthy and gets that 20% attack increase again. It's not bad for a primary damage dealer, and it keeps him alive when you're leveling up. It keeps him alive long enough for your tank to step in. Veiled is a PvP reward. Very low level commanders may not have this. Mid-level commanders and characters who are working on getting into the real end game, they will probably have access to Veiled, and you can apply it to him and it'll work just fine. So we've gone over some sets there. We've gone over abilities. We've gone over his EISO slots. Let's take a look at some potential build options for him. Hawkeye is a damage dealer, and he has some options in how he does it. But because they're all done with the same purpose, build it based on your team. If your team uses lots of free attacks, if you're trying to build a free attack team and you've got access to Luke Cage, or you've got access to Hawkeye, or it's not Hawkeye, or Age of Ultron Hawkeye, or if you have access to Iron Fist or Captain Marvel, or especially Star-Lord, Hawkeye works really well with Star-Lord. If you're running those characters and you're doing so because they can increase free attacks and apply off-balanced, then Fire Support and Rapid Shot for the free attacks from Overwatch, for the free attacks from Rapid Attack, these pair very well with those free attack teams. You're free to put whatever you want in the third slot. My suggestion, if you're going to rely on that, is to either put in Spotter, because focused and sharpshooting, wonderful things, or to go ahead and bring the all-wonderful multi-arrow just to have a solid area of attack. This is one of the things that causes Hawkeye to excel in the early game. He has one of the best one-star area attacks in the game, like pretty much hands down. This is one of his true great uses. And if you are running a projectile team, if you were lucky enough to draw Age of Ultron Black Widow early on, Pistolet, her very first ability, can be used to apply targeted to the enemy as well as sharpshooting to herself, but at 3-star it's sharpshooting to the entire team. Using that to apply targeted to the enemy line as well as sharpshooting to herself allows you to make heavy use of his projectile attacks. Things like Sure Shot, for really, and Sure Shot because it's precise, for that really high base damage. If you were using a shock team, if you Stun Arrow can be used to set off static shock. It is his only one. It kind of fits its way in there. Use it as a third slot in place of Overwatch. If you're not using a free attack team, I often use Stun Arrow in place of the Overwatch for its utility, while setting him up with, here we have a high-powered single target and a high-powered multi-target that apply those wonderful stat debuffs. And then you kind of have a choice then of what do you want to throw in that third slot in order to increase his effectiveness. For early players, this is not a bad lineup of abilities. That focused for the team, allows you to clear early content by being able to consistently hit them, while having a powerful single target and multi-target ability in your slots for it. So think of this as an early team setup. Another one that you can do is a boss killer setup. And if you're going to do that, you're going to want that same set of buffs for there. And then you're going to want Tracer Arrow. Tracer Arrow allows you to apply targeted and can be used to say, you're the biggest, baddest enemy of the group. Let's stick targeted on you. Use your other two heroes. Use your tank to keep Hawkeye with his sharpshooting buff so that he doesn't lose it. And then use your third slot, which is either going to be, maybe a healer, maybe a support. Use them to kind of work down the smaller adds, the extra minion, mook, grunt, whatever you want to call them, that tends to pop in with bigger bosses and mini bosses. And then go ahead, and if you can spare the points for it, pick up Snipe. Snipe against a targeted enemy with sharpshooting will often kill a boss or a mini boss in a single shot. It is extremely powerful. I have had the chance to test this out due to an ally. That particular combination right there is a single target killing move. It is not designed to take advantage of his AoE abilities. It is designed to kill a single powerful enemy very quickly. We're going to wrap things up. Final thoughts on Hawkeye. We've looked at some variety in his builds. His purpose will always be fast, accurate damage. Always. That is his purpose. His versatility lies in his different ways in dealing it. High-level players who are going back and farming low-level content, such as your scouting missions, on Saturdays, when we're trying to build up our silver pool, I tend to spend silver like it's pouring water down a well for me, because I'm constantly leveling up lots and lots of characters for these pure theory crafting videos. His ability to consistently clear wave after wave after wave, even just at level 31 star, I really need to sink some more points into him just because I can. His ability to do that, even at in-game, makes him a consistently used character for me. When you're leveling up and you don't have a lot of options, Hawkeye is amazingly useful and versatile as a primary damage dealer while you're still trying to draw other characters. A lot of people look at him and say, oh, he sucks compared to those others, because they start at 2 or 3 star and he starts at 1, so they start with higher stats. Or they're saying free attack teams are the end-all be-all and Wasp is the best tank in the game. Right now, there's some definite truth to those statements, but that doesn't mean that Hawkeye himself is not useful. When you're leveling up through normal and hard, as opposed to heroic or epic bosses, you're kind of in that point of, if the enemy has 100 health, what does it matter if you do 120 damage or 150? You're killing him either way. Hawkeye is exceptional for doing 120 damage, maybe not the 150. Yes, there's other people who do more damage, but he's exceptional for doing that amount of consistent lethal damage, even from the earliest points in the game. Playdom was extremely generous with Hawkeye as a starting character. He fills the needs of early commanders and the ability to push consistently harder and harder content extremely well. The fact that he is the first character you get, the fact that he is the common freebie that everybody has and you're sick of him from seeing that, does not necessarily diminish the overall utility and value that Hawkeye can bring to an early team. I've gone over a lot of really basic information in this video that is probably boring for in-game players or heavy users of the Reddit who've been around for a while. But I've also been seeing posts by newer commanders who are excited to draw new heroes. I'm hoping that this video for them is more than just about Hawkeye. It's about looking into the mechanics of each move so that you can then compare the new heroes you draw with Hawkeye, who you now hopefully understand a little bit better, and say, hey, I think for me, this new hero is going to do better because I can see how his moves work and how he'll fit into my ideal dream team that I'm building now. So until I get to another video, hopefully we're going to see one in just the next couple days. There are so many characters left to do. I've got to pump one of these out every day or two if I ever want to catch up in the next, like, I don't know, 6 years of my life. Until then, this is Hoagland. Check the companion post on the Reddit. I'll be putting it up about the same time that this video uploads. We'll see you next time. I'm out.